What would you do if a letter from your HOA told you to rip out the very place your father proposed to your mother, your old cedar footbridge, within 30 days? Or pay a fine every sunrise until it's gone? Imagine paying dues, year flash, after year, just to be told your memories are non-compliant. Mia looked at that letter and thought, all right, you picked the wrong neighbor to bully. And, yeah, I meant it. My name is Ethan Cole. Though most folks around Birchwater just say Cole, I'm in my early 50s. A former highway engineer who learned to read soil the way some people read faces. I came back to this lake to look after my late mom's place, a modest shingled cabin with a screened porch that smells like pine cleaner and coffee. The crown of the property isn't the house, though. It's the footbridge. Our footbridge. Hand-cut cedar beams. River stone piers capped with old iron brackets. My granddad salvaged from a sawmill that died before I was born. The deck boards sing when you cross at dawn, and the rails carry the scars of decades' carved initials. A heart. A crooked fish that I swear looks better every year. That bridge isn't just timber. It's a timeline. My granddad and his brothers set the first stringer during a freak cold snap and thawed their hands over a coffee can full of coals. My father asked my mother to marry him at the crown of the arch with snow flurries drifting like torn-up wedding confetti. I took my own fiancée, her name was Lila, out there in late summer. Cicadas tuning up in the trees. And I fumbled the ring so bad it bounced once on the plank and nearly jumped for the water. She laughed and said yes before I could ruin it. Years later, when the world kicked me right in the knees and took Lila back, that bridge became the one place I could breathe without pretending. Birchwater used to be a handshake town. You needed a socket set. You borrowed mine. Your outboard coughed. Walt next door rebuilt the carp for the price of a beer and a story. Miss June grew tomatoes that tasted like they remembered the sun from last August. We had rules. Sure, don't leave trash at the ramp. Wave when a kid rides by. But they were the kind of rules that feel like manners. Not like someone measuring your grass with a ruler and a stopwatch. Then the signs went up. Birchwater Reserve, a premier lakeside community. Some developer in city shoes drew straight lines on a crooked shoreline and sold the view to people who thought silence is something you buy. With the new gaze came a glossy binder of covenants, conditions, and restrictions. The kind of stack that makes you tired just looking. And riding shotgun with that binder was Karen. Now, a lot of good people are named Karen. This Karen leaned into the meme like she patented it. Mid-40s. Perfect blowout. Smile like a laser level. She and her husband, Brad, yeah. I know, bought the biggest new construction glass box on the point and hosted wine tastings where the bottle cost more than my first truck. She moved through meetings like a realtor showing a house that doesn't belong to you, but you're talking as if it does. Within a season, she was HOA president, flanked by a board made of yes-men in golf shirts. Our first collision happened at Murphy's General. Under the humming soda cooler, she was lecturing old Mrs. Klein about mailbox pallet compliance. I wish I was kidding when her eyes slid over and landed on my work boots and bridge-scarred hands. You must be Mr. Cole, she said. Like she was confirming a rumor. We've had so many compliments on how rustic your property feels. Rustic landed like an insult wearing a sweater. I nodded and took my coffee black, as if that might end the conversation. It did not. Spring turned a corner, and with it came the envelope Notice of violation. My name in bold. An account number. And then the poetry of pettiness. Structure, unapproved, pedestrian, bridge. Findings, non-conforming materials. Aesthetic incompatibility. Potential liability exposure. Directive remove within 30 days. Penalty, $100 per day after the deadline, plus administrative costs and lien eligibility. I read it twice to make sure the ink didn't rearrange itself. Non-conforming materials. Cedar and stone are non-conforming now. Aesthetic incompatibility. With what glass railings and sadness? I walked the letter down to the HOA office, which is a fancy way to say Karen's vaulted living room with a receptionist and a fern. She was there, of course, tapping on a laptop like she was landing planes. Afternoon, I said, laying the paper between us. That bridge predates this association by well decades. She smiled the smile of a person who mistakes patience for surrender. We appreciate your attachment to history. Mr. Cole, the board is tasked with protecting our collective property values. The bridge doesn't align with the curated aesthetic. The curated, what now? The look, she said, spreading her hands toward the lake as if she owned light. Our brand. Ma'am, I said, because my mother raised me right. My granddad didn't build a brand. He built a bridge. If you'd like to appeal, she chirped, you can present at the next meeting. I must warn you, the board tends to side with expert assessments. Who's experts? Independent consultants, she said. Wand, a hair too fast. I left before my mouth said something my conscience would have to haul to church. Outside on her perfect pavers, I called Walt. You got the letter, he said. Not a question. Yep. Told you. They came from my shed last month. Said the patina looked like neglect. He snorted. Patina. That shed's seen more winters than that woman's seen countertops. You coming to the meeting. Wouldn't miss it, he said, bringing popcorn and a bad attitude. The hearing happened inside Karen's glass palace. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the lake like it was a captive. A folding table draped in white set like an altar. On it, a binder stamped Birchwater Safety Consultants, LLC. I flipped the first page and laughed before I could stop myself. The LLC was registered to a mail drop in the next county. The inspector's last name matched Brad's cousin, the one who sells insurance and once called a canoe a kayak like it was a hate crime. The findings were a collage of grainy photos and words that sound like liability but dissolve if you lick your finger. When it was my turn, I kept it simple. I brought the original county permit yellowed. Sure, but legible dated long before any HOA dreamt of dues. I lay down copies of maintenance logs because I'm the kind of man who keeps a notebook in the truck for when a bolt wants a date to remember. I had a fresh letter from a licensed structural engineer, retired buddy from my highway days, stating the bridge is sound for pedestrian use with load safety margins that would make a building inspector purr. I finished and looked at their faces. Two board members looked like they were calculating how much courage costs at retail. One glanced at Karen, then at his shoes. Thank you for your passion, Karen said, clipping the word like a coupon. We appreciate legacy. However, our expert's report is compelling. The bridge is a hazard and an eyesore. The directive stands. They voted. Hands went up like balloons that didn't want to be there. Unanimous. Karen tapped a little wooden gavel on a table that probably has never known a water ring. 30 days. I walked out to the shore and let the wind slap the heat off my face. Walt came up. Paper cup of coffee in one big paw. Well, he asked. She brought her own referee. I said. He grunted. Karen, don't fight fair. Karen fights pretty. Those are different. He sipped. What now? Now, I said. We read the rulebook better than the people using it for a bat. I took 3 days off and moved into the county archives, like a raccoon moves into an open garage. I found the subdivision plat, the dedication notes, and golden ticket, an easement sketch from the 1940s that traced the creek like a vein and labeled it navigable seasonal waterway. That phrasing matters. Navigable means the water isn't just a decorative moat, it's a corridor, which pulls it under laws that make HOAs itch. I called a friend at the Army Corps. Yeah. I still had a few numbers and asked about structures crossing a navigable channel. He sent me public guidance in plain English. Local covenants don't stomp federal allowances. Pre-existing structures in good repair, generally protected, especially with original permits intact. I also read the HOA's own bylaws. Funny thing about bullies who hide behind binders, they rarely read past the parts that benefit them. Buried in Article 9. Section 3. There was a carve-out, like a barn door left open. Historical or legacy elements established prior to the association's formation shall be exempt from aesthetic conformity requirements, provided safety is documented to reasonable satisfaction. Reasonable satisfaction, not Karen satisfaction. There's a canyon between those. Next meeting. I brought copies for everyone, cheap paper, large font, highlighted lines. Karen tried to gavel me for grandstanding. I ignored the toy hammer and addressed the room. My family's bridge predates this HOA. I've got the original county permit. I held it up. I've got a current safety letter from a licensed engineer signed. Stumped. I've got an Army Corps interpretation that says you don't get to overrule a navigable crossing any more than I get to repaint your living room. And your own bylaws. I tapped the highlighted section. Say, legacy structures are exempt from aesthetic demands if they're safe. They are. So are we done with the theater? You could hear the room shift. People who'd been staring at their phones started actually looking at words. 2 board members flipped to Article 9, like men discovering there's a map 5 miles into a hike. Karen smiled without teeth. Mr. Cole, we appreciate your research. While the bridge may be historic, it is also unfortunately an insurance exposure. Our responsibility is to the collective, not to any one nostalgic element. My granddad didn't build nostalgia, I said. He built access. She leaned forward. Then, Ethan, perhaps you'll consider our compromise. She slid a folder across. Inside a render of a ridiculous aluminum thing with glass guardrails, blue LED strips, and a price tag that made me choke. We will approve a replacement bridge, so long as it conforms to the community's modern aesthetic. You want me to bulldoze history and buy a runway? I asked. No. She tapped the folder. Or you can begin accruing fines. It's funny how anger can make you careful. I put the folder back like it might stain my fingerprints. You do what you gotta do, I said. So will I. That night, someone idled a sedan near my fence line with the lights off. I stood on the porch and let them see me see them. They drove off. The next morning a letter arrived about my improperly stored canoe, which has lived under the south eave since before I knew better than to hurt my back, dragging it. A week after that, I found fresh saw marks on a cedar stringer clean. Recent. Like a warning. My stomach did a slow turn. Call the sheriff, Walt said when I showed him the cut. I will, I said. But first I'm installing cameras. He nodded. I'll help. And I ain't asking permission. We put up 2 small units tucked into the soffit and one on a maple, pointing at the bridge. The first footage we caught was a raccoon washing a Dorito like it was baptizing a child. The second was a man in a dark hoodie pacing the bank and shining a flashlight onto the pier brackets. He kept his face away from the lens like he knew what not to do. Amateurs watch TV shows, pros read manuals. This one watched television. I turned everything over to Deputy Alvarez, who has a voice like a Monday and paperwork that could win an award for neat. He took notes, asked careful questions, and scheduled a patrol drive-by for the next few weeks. Karen changed tactics. She hosted a community safety forum at the clubhouse and positioned herself as the sacrificial saint. We're only trying to keep everyone safe. She cooed into the mic. Eyes damp. She floated a rumor that I was unstable, that grief had made me erratic, that I'd shouted at a kid on a bicycle never happened. She suggested, with that oily, just asking questions voice, that unsecured wood structures increase insurance premiums for all. She invited a man with a polo shirt that said Regional Property Solutions to nod along. When the Q&A opened, I raised my hand. She somehow didn't see it for 10 minutes. When she finally called on me, I kept my tone softer than the inside of a biscuit. Karen, will you state for the record whether Birchwater Safety Consultants is in any way connected to your family? Her smile twitched. This is not the place. So that's a yes, I said. People murmured. Not all of them were my friends. Some were just tired. The fines arrived anyway. $100 for visible tools when my toolbox sat open beside my truck while I changed a hose. $100 for a flagpole bracket, they said, wasn't approved to finish. $100 for a stack of firewood that leaned like a gentleman does when he listens. It became background noise. A petty drumbeat pay. Pay. Fine. Pay. Fine. I paid none of it. I put the funds in a separate account and saved the envelopes like a scrapbook of spite. Each time one came, I logged the date, the claim, and the code section they pretended to apply. Paper stacks can be shields if you stack them straight. Somewhere in there, a little miracle happened. Folks started knocking on my door. Quiet types, tired types. Miss June with her tomato basket. Mr. Patel, who runs the pharmacy and bakes lemon bars when he's stressed. A nurse named Carla, who works nights and sleeps days, and still got a citation for leaving her garbage bin at the curb past noon on a Wednesday, because she was literally saving a life. Cole, she said, rubbing her eyes. I ain't political. I just want peace. But this ain't peace. We sat at my porch table with a legal pad and made columns name, citation, amount, code, date. Patterns emerged like fish rising when the lake goes glassy. The consulting payouts in the HOA budget went to companies that shared last names with board members. The architectural review packet required stamped drawings for birdhouses. I wish I was exaggerating. People had been too ashamed or too alone to push back. Turns out there's power in lining up your anger and stapling it in the same direction. Recall, Mr. Patel said quietly, tapping the bylaws. We can trigger a recall. We need signatures. Karen's good at making people doubt themselves. Carla said, we'll need to meet them where they are. On their porches, I said, with cookies. Miss June smiled and patted my hand. Baby, I've got cookie tins older than that woman's attitude. We set to work. No shouting. No signs. Just conversations. We didn't sell rage. We sold sleep. We emphasized that a board should be a service, not a throne. We didn't mail anything because Karen had a habit of misplacing items that threatened her crown. We brought a notary to the block party and a folding table to the farmer's market. We told the story of an old bridge and a new arrogance, of bylaws weaponized, of neighbors turned into revenue streams. Karen noticed. Of course. She sent a community update full of euphemisms and a soft focus photo of a fawn. She spun the fines as gentle correction and the consultants as best-in-class partners. She warned about outside influences trying to politicize the lake. Outside influences meaning people who live here but refuse to clap. Then came the lien threat, pay the accrued fines within 60 days or face a lien on the cabin. She thought money would make me kneel. I did the one thing bullies never planned for. I smiled. See? While I was in the archives, I found something else. The creek under my bridge isn't just navigable in a seasonal sense. It's part of a managed water system, fed by a small upstream dam, built back when men wore hats to the hardware store. Ownership of that dam had ping-ponged over time through foreclosures and land swaps ugly, boring paper that most folks would shred. Turned out, after a chain of custody that read like a travel itinerary, the dam belonged to a tiny maintenance district that went defunct, and then by reversion clause to the heirs listed in a trust my granddad filed. Lawyers call it obscure. I call it Christmas in July. I sat with a water rights attorney named Rebecca Shaw, a woman with cowboy boots under her suit, and a smile that says, file it clean or don't file it at all. She read the trust twice. She read the state code once. Then she nodded. Mr. Cole, she said, you have controlling interest in the dam. With that comes responsibility and authority to manage water levels for safety and ecology. If the structure requires inspection or maintenance, you can lower the channel within regulatory guidelines. That's not a loophole. That's the job. I don't want to hurt folks, I said. I just want them to stop hurting the place. Then we do it by the book, she replied. Notice, plan, state oversight, environmental monitors. Let the truth work. I left her office feeling the kind of calm that scares bullies, but I didn't run to Facebook. I called Walt. I called Carla. I called Mr. Patel and Miss June. I called Marcus, a fisheries biologist who once helped me rescue a snapping turtle from a storm drain in a suit and tie. We crowded my porch around a map of the watershed and a pot of coffee that would make a cardiologist frown. The dam needs inspection, Marcus said, tracing a finger along the blue line. If you lower the channel, even modestly, you'll expose spawning beds, knock back algae, and let us photograph structural joints that haven't seen daylight since who knows when. Done right, Fish will thank you. Done wrong. People will scream. We do it right. I said. No surprises. No stunts. Walt grinned. Slow and mean. Still gonna make some folks' dock ladders lonely. Not the goal, I said, but I won't cry if the resort crowd cancels one brunch. The plan was simple, which is different than Easy File. The necessary notices with the county and state, post the schedule publicly, invite oversight, set up turbidity meters, deploy volunteers with nets to shepherd stranded minnows, and this mattered to me. Keep the North Cove full enough for the rowboats and the working skiffs, while the flashy pontoons on the South Arm took a temporary nap in the mud. Not revenge. Balance. We printed flyers that said, Channel Maintenance and Habitat Restoration proposed temporary lowering in friendly letters. We listed the phone number of Rebecca's office for questions. We anchored the whole thing to statute and duty. We delivered copies to the HOA. Certified mail. Signature required. I addressed Karen's envelope with block letters tall enough for a satellite to read. 3 days later, she called an emergency board session and tried to stop it with a word that people use when they haven't done their homework injunction. Her fancy lawyer. A man who said riparian like it was a French dessert. Argued we were weaponizing water. Rebecca responded with citations and a face that did not care about anyone's brunch. Judge, she said, my client is the dam steward. He is fulfilling state-mandated inspection and maintenance. The association's aesthetic discomfort is not a legal standard. The judge peered over her glasses the way my high school librarian did when you lied about reading Steinbeck. Motion denied. She said, proceed with compliance to the plan. Karen's mouth smiled. Her eyes didn't. That night, a pickup with no plates backed down the service road by the dam. The game camera Walt, set in a cedar snag, saw 2 figures hop the chain gate. One pulled a crowbar. One lifted a bolt cutter. They made it 7 feet before a floodlight. We wired to a motion sensor woke up like an angel with a whistle. They froze. I stepped out of the dark with Deputy Alvarez, who read them their options in a tone that suggested fewer would be wise. Gentlemen, I said, tampering with water control infrastructure is the kind of bad decision that sticks to your resume. They decided to leave. We decided to press charges. The HOA newsletter the next morning chirped about malicious actors undermining community stability. It forgot to mention who hired them. Rumors grew legs, as rumors do. But when Alvarez visited doorsteps with a copy of the Penal Code section highlighted, even the loudest mouths took a day off. We set the maintenance day for the first Saturday in June because that's when volunteers show up and kids can watch signs happen. Marcus ordered measuring gear on a shoestring grant. Carla recruited teens who needed service hours and bribed them with brownies that ruined diets and improved morale. Miss June organized a table labeled Ask a Biologist with jars full of pond microlife to stare at through magnifying glasses. Walt built a temporary ramp so we could put a small john boat below the spillway for photos without anyone breaking their neck. The night before, I walked the bridge with a flashlight and tried not to cry. I spoke out loud like a man who knows ghosts don't judge. We're gonna do this, gentle, I said to the cedar rail, running my thumb over the letters I carved years ago. We're gonna show them what care looks like. The air smelled like cut grass and lake breath. Somewhere across the water, someone tuned a guitar. Somewhere behind me, an owl decided we were all ridiculous and went about its business. Just before dawn, The lake was a sheet of pewter. Volunteers gathered on the dam apron with travel mugs and ball caps. Marcus taped laminated signs that explained what turbidity means and why lower isn't always worse. Carla handed out sunscreen like a field medic. Deputy Alvarez set cones and waved off the one guy who always thinks cones are a suggestion. Karen arrived late, as if the universe owed her a dramatic entrance. Big sunglasses, bigger voice. "You can't," she started. "Judge says we can," Rebecca said, stepping between the word and the wheel. Karen's mouth kept moving. Her argument changed costumes half a dozen times in 60 seconds safety. Property values, emotional distress, real estate comparables, bird habitat. She actually tried that one before realizing Marcus was wearing a state fish and wildlife badge. He raised an eyebrow so politely it felt like a citation. "Ma'am," Alvarez said finally, "please step behind the tape." She did, with the dignity of a cat in a rainstorm. I set my hands on the wheel. The steel felt like history. I looked at the water and thought of my granddad's gloves. I took a breath and turned. The gate shifted with a groan that came from somewhere as old as the county. Water found the hole like a memory. It began as a ribbon, then a sheet, then a roar that turned heads and sent gulls ratcheting into the sky. The surface fell a finger's width. Then two. Then enough that kids could point and say, "Look." The lake didn't die. It exhaled. Within an hour, rings appeared on pilings that nobody had seen since the phones in our pockets had buttons. By midday, the south arm, where the biggest new docks are, showed sand, tongues, and the bones of old stumps, notched by beavers, whose great-great-grandkids probably think the word beaver is a rumor. Pontoons settled into honest mud. A few angry social media posts appeared faster than ducks can skip, but they looked silly next to a photo of a child holding a minnow like treasure. Marcus and his grad student measured cloudiness, oxygen, temperature. Numbers looked good. Turtles sunned on exposed logs like retirees on cruise chairs. A mink zigzagged along the new shoreline with a fish in its mouth, so smug I wanted to hand it a trophy. Karen stood very still behind her sunglasses and watched the resort's dock go high and dry. The band that was supposed to play lakeside brunch stared at their shoes and quietly loaded their van. Because even musicians know when nature wins the downbeat. I didn't gloat. I knelt and tightened a valve, an eighth of a turn, and kept one eye on the meter. The goal wasn't to break anything. The goal was to see the bottom, fix what needs fixing, give the lake a haircut, then let it fill like a good glass. Around late afternoon, a man I didn't know, Rolex tan, polite voice, walked up with his hands out like a man offering peace in a language he doesn't speak yet. "I moved here because my wife wanted quiet," he said. "I thought the rules made quiet. Maybe it's the people who do." He nodded at the kids with dip nets. Didn't know a lake could be healthier with less water for a bit. "Most things breathe better when you give them room," I said. He laughed softly. "Guess that includes neighborhoods." Across the way, Karen pulled out her phone and began talking very fast to a person I imagine lives far from lakes. That was fine. My job, for once, was to keep turning the wheel just enough and to trust that the truth is heavy in your hand when you hold it right. By evening, the water had dropped the target amount, not dramatic, just honest. The bridge's stone feet stood there as if they'd been waiting for someone to notice their good posture. I set the wheel lock, locked the numbers, and looked around at a town I recognized again. "Day 1, Walt said, slapping my shoulder. "I'd say it went." "It did," I said, and my chest felt like a room with a window open after a long winter. But if I'm honest, and I tried to be, peace wasn't what I heard when I drove home. Not in my bones. What I heard was the rest of the fight Karen wasn't done picking. The fines, the whispers, the lean threats stacked up like cordwood in an email inbox. The story wasn't over. It was just getting loud in a new key. I poured coffee into a chipped mug, stepped onto the bridge, and let the boars talk back like they always do. Somewhere behind me, on a driveway paved too smooth, a woman rehearsed a new speech about disruptions and bad actors. Somewhere down the road, a deputy flagged a file for follow-up. Somewhere under my boots, old Cedar admired the sunset like a man who's seen trouble and still chose to love a place. "All right," I said to the quiet. "Round 2. The lake made that small, satisfied sound it makes when the wind changes. A heron lifted its legs out of the shallows like it was stepping over a fragile line and flew off, unhurried. I stood there until dark, felt like a blanket, until the only lights left were porch bulbs and stars. And I promised the bridge. Yeah, I know how that sounds, that I'd keep being the wall a bully hates to hit. Because here's the secret nobody tells you when you sign those HOA forms with the pen they hand you, and the smile that says, "Welcome, communities aren't made by bylaws. Communities are made by the people who show up with brownies and a wrench and a story." Karen can curate aesthetics. We can curate courage. And, look, I'm not perfect. I talk too plain. I pick my battles late. I hold grudges like pennies in a jar you think you'll never count. But when someone tries to cut the legs out from under what made a family, I'm gonna stand where the water meets the wood and say no. Kindly at first, then louder. So that's where part 1 ends. Not with a victory lap. Not with a villain melting into a puddle of decor samples, but with a town on the edge of choosing what kind of neighbors we want to be. The water is lower for a reason. The truth is higher than a rumor if you let it be. Tomorrow, the meter will tick. The turtles will tan. And somewhere a gavel will look very small in a very large room. Come morning, I'll turn the wheel a hair to keep the numbers honest. After that, I've got signatures to gather, a recall petition to print, and if we're lucky enough, courage to knock on doors that have been shut long enough to forget what listening sounds like. You ever notice how bullies never stop at one swing? If you don't push back, they'll just keep finding new ways to dig at you. That's exactly how Karen worked. The minute the water dropped and the dogs sat half-stranded in the South Basin, she switched tactics. The HOA newsletter went out the next day with a headline in bold. Community under siege. Rogue member endangers lake. Rogue member. That was me. She wrote 3 paragraphs about how I had unilaterally lowered the water and sabotaged property values. She called it reckless vigilantism. Reckless when I'd filed paperwork, invited oversight, and had state officials literally standing next to me at the dam. It would have been funny if it hadn't been so nasty. Some neighbors who didn't know the whole story looked at me sideways that week, like I'd stolen Christmas. Others, though, pulled me aside at the grocery store or the post office. Don't let her spin you down. Cole, Mr. Patel told me. We saw the notice. We know you did it clean. Still, the smear campaign kept dripping like a leaky faucet. Karen even sent an email blast claiming she had credible concerns for community safety because of my unpredictable behavior. In plain English, she was trying to paint me as unstable. That stunt backfired. Deputy Alvarez showed up at my place for a wellness check. And when I handed her a binder thicker than a Bible with every filing, permit, and photo logged in order, she shook her head. She's overplaying her hand. Alvarez muttered, "You're more organized than half the county." The recall petition was gathering steam. We'd already crossed the threshold for signatures. But we didn't want just enough. We wanted overwhelming. So we kept knocking on doors. Walt and I. Miss June with her tins of cookies. Carla in her scrubs fresh off a night shift. We weren't selling anger. We were selling sanity. One night, I sat on the porch with a young couple, Matt and Jennifer. They'd moved in less than a year ago. Shiny-eyed and hopeful. They confessed they'd been scared to sign. Karen said, if we supported you, she'd block our fence permit. Jennifer whispered, "Listen, I told them, she doesn't own your fence, and she sure doesn't own your voice. This is America. We don't let one person hold a whole town hostage with threats about paint colors and lawn height." Matt looked at the bridge glowing in the sunset and finally said, "You're right. Enough is enough." They signed. Every signature felt like a brick in a wall we were building together. Of course, Karen noticed. She always noticed. And when fear didn't stop people, she escalated. That week, someone dumped a load of brush and garbage right at the edge of my property. HOA letter showed up 2 days later. Failure to maintain property free of debris. You catching the pattern, create the mess. Then fine the homeowner. Lucky for me, the new camera Walt installed caught a pickup with HOA treasurer Stan behind the wheel. We delivered a copy straight to Deputy Alvarez. Stan stammered about yard waste disposal confusion. The citation disappeared quietly. But the damage to their credibility stuck. Folks saw the game for what it was: dirty. Meanwhile, the lake itself was healing. Marcus and his grad students came back weekly, taking measurements. They showed us how sunlight hitting the shallows revived native plants. Kids squealed when frogs returned. Anglers bragged that the bays were hitting harder than they had in years. The signs didn't lie. The channel lowering worked. "Funny, isn't it?" Walt said, leaning on his boat one morning. "We do right by the lake. And suddenly, property values take care of themselves. But Karen don't get that. She thinks you can bully nature like you bully neighbors." The recall election was set for late July. Karen tried to cancel it, claimed our petition was procedurally defective. Rebecca, my attorney, marched into the meeting with statute printouts and cornered them in front of everyone. "You don't get to invent procedures," she said flatly. "The election stands." That was the first time I saw fear flash across Karen's eyes. Just a flicker. But it was there. In the days before the vote, tension buzzed around Birchwater like cicadas at dusk. Karen's side plastered signs about protecting our community. We didn't print signs. We had conversations. Porch to porch. Coffee to coffee. By the time the ballots were ready, you could feel the tide turning. Still, I didn't sleep much the night before. I sat on the bridge, ran my hand along the cedar rail. and whispered to Lila like I sometimes do when the world feels heavy. "Tomorrow's for you too," I said. "They ain't tearing down our story." The water below was calm, like it agreed. Election day came hot and bright. The community center smelled like coffee and nerves. People filed in, some glaring, some smiling, some just tired of all the drama. The count took forever. Finally, the chair of the election committee stood up with the results. By a vote of 78 to 22, she announced, "The current HOA board is hereby recalled." The room erupted. Some folks clapped. Some cried. Some just sighed in relief. Karen sat stiff as marble, lips pressed white. She gathered her purse, muttered something about ungrateful residents, and stormed out without looking back. I'll be honest, I felt like shouting for joy, but instead, I walked outside, took a deep breath of lake air, and just let the tension drain out. For the first time in years, Birchwater belonged to its people again. But here's the thing, winning the vote didn't end the fight. Because while Karen lost her title, she wasn't done scheming. And when a bully loses power, sometimes they lash out worse than before. You'd think after losing the recall by a landslide, Karen would have packed her wine glasses and found a new HOA to torment. Nope. Bullies don't just fade, they get desperate. Within a week of the vote, she filed a lawsuit in county court, claimed the recall was invalid, claimed ballots were tampered with, claimed outside agitators influenced the vote. Outside agitators. That was me, Ethan. Born and raised in Birchwater. The irony nearly made me laugh. If it hadn't been so expensive. Rebecca, my attorney, endoled it like swatting flies. She filed a motion to dismiss backed with notarized petitions, video of the ballot count, and affidavits from 3 independent observers. Judge barely took 10 minutes to throw it out. Motion denied. She said, "Costs assigned to the plaintiff." Karen's face turned red enough to match her blazer, but she wasn't done. The next attack came sneakier. One morning I got a notice from my bank. Someone had filed a lien against my property for unpaid HOA fines. You read that right. Even after the recall, Karen and her cronies tried to sneak paperwork through as if they were still in charge. I marched straight to the clerk's office with my big binder of documents. The deputy clerk, a tired-looking woman who's seen every kind of nonsense, shook her head when she saw the filing. "They're not officers of record anymore," she said. "This lien's void, but they sure wasted everyone's time." I thanked her and walked out, the paper still warm from the stamp. But as I drove home, it hit me. Karen wasn't fighting for rules anymore. She was fighting to break me, to make life so exhausting that I'd give up. Around that time, the smear campaign online reached fever pitch. Fake social media accounts popped up, posting photos of my property, claiming my bridge was unsafe, that I was a hoarder, even hinting I had anger issues. Same accounts also praised Karen as a visionary leader wronged by small minds. Real subtle. Trouble was, not everyone online knew the truth. My niece called from out of state, worried. "Uncle Ethan, people are saying scary stuff about you." That one stung. But I reminded myself, lies don't hold up when you live where everyone can see who you are day in and day out. Folks at the diner, the hardware store, the church, they knew me. They knew the bridge. And slowly, those lies lost their sting. Meanwhile, the new board got to work. And let me tell ya, it was like the sun coming out after a storm. First order of business, freeze all fines under review. Second, audit the budget. Turned out, Karen's consulting fees had funneled thousands into companies linked to her relatives. Third, pass a resolution protecting legacy structures, like my bridge. The vote was unanimous. When they announced it at the community meeting, people actually clapped. One old-timer shouted, "About dang time," and half the room laughed. For me, it wasn't about applause. It was about finally being able to cross that bridge in peace, coffee in hand, without worrying about another letter in the mailbox. But, like I said, Karen wasn't done. She'd lost the gavel, lost the board, lost her lawsuit, but she still had money and spite. That's a nasty mix. One night in August, I heard a sound at the edge of the property. Not the usual raccoons. This was heavier. I grabbed a flashlight and headed down toward the bridge. And there they were, two guys in hoodies with a cordless saw. Halfway through one of the support beams. "Hey," I barked. My voice must have carried. Because they froze. One dropped the saw. The other bolted. I managed to snap a photo before they disappeared into the dark. The next morning, I gave the photo to Deputy Alvarez. She nodded grimly. "Looks like hired hands. We'll run the plate." And wouldn't you know it, truck belonged to a landscaping company Karen used regularly. Charges got filed. Nothing makes you look guiltier than trying to physically destroy the thing you've been calling a safety hazard. That should have been the end. But you know what they say, cornered animals are dangerous. And Karen still had one more trick up her sleeve. She tried to buy me out. Yup. One afternoon, she marched up my porch steps in a designer suit, carrying a thick envelope. No smile this time. Just cold eyes. She slapped the envelope on the table. $50,000. She said. Cash. You transfer the deed and walk away. Bridge and all. I laughed so hard, I nearly spilled my coffee. Lady, this bridge isn't for sale, and neither is my backbone. She stood there, shaking with rage, before hissing, "You'll regret this." Then she stormed off. I watched her drive away, thinking, no, Karen, the only one regretting anything here is you. Because what she didn't realize was that every stunt she pulled only pushed the neighborhood further away from her. Folks who'd once backed her started apologizing to me. Even some of the new money crowd admitted they were sick of her drama. The tide had turned. And for the first time in years, Birchwater was starting to feel like a community again. But just when we thought it was over, September brought a storm, both from the sky and from Karen. The first week of September, the sky itself seemed to join the fight. A storm rolled in off the lake, the kind that makes windows rattle and dogs hide under the table. Rain hammered down for hours, and when dawn finally broke, Birchwater looked like it had been through a war. Tree limbs scattered across lawns, docks half torn loose, and my old cedar bridge standing strong, but with water surging high against its stone feet. I pulled on my boots and hurried down, heart pounding, ready to see the worst. But you know what? That bridge held. The same cedar beams my grandfather laid 70 years ago shrugged off a storm that chewed up brand new aluminum docks like they were toys. Neighbors noticed. They came by, checking on me, checking on the bridge. Guess it ain't such a hazard after all, Walt said with a grin, kicking at a pile of storm-tossed debris. Even people who had doubted before were impressed. If that bridge survived this, Mr. Patel muttered, maybe we ought to call it historic protection instead of an eyesore. Of course, Karen saw things differently. That very afternoon, she blasted another email to anyone who would listen, claiming the storm had further compromised the bridge and increased the urgent need for removal. It was laughable, except she also included a professional statement from a so-called inspector. Same cousin, different letterhead. She just would not quit. The new board finally stepped in. This harassment has to stop, Chairwoman Carla said at the community meeting. She announced that the board was formally recognizing the bridge as a heritage structure, protected under community guidelines. Applause broke out, louder than I'd ever heard in that room. Even the kids clapped. Karen sat stone-faced in the back row, lips pressed so tight you'd think she was chewing nails. But like I told you before, a cornered bully is the most dangerous kind. That storm gave her cover for one last dirty trick. One night, maybe a week later, Walt called me. Cole, you better come down here. I hustled to the shoreline where he was standing with a flashlight. He pointed to the dam's service gate. Someone had tampered with the lock. The chain was cut clean through. Looks like they tried to force it open. Walt said if they'd managed, they could have flooded half the channel. We both knew who'd benefit if that happened. If the bridge washed out, Karen could finally say, "See, unsafe." I phoned Deputy Alvarez. She showed up, took one look, and said, "This isn't mischief. This is sabotage." She promised to investigate. And this time, I could tell she meant business. Meanwhile, life around the lake kept proving what we already knew. The lowering had worked. Marcus, the biologist, gave a presentation at the library with charts and photos, frogs returning. Clearer water, stronger fish stocks. Even skeptics nodded. Turns out, Marcus said, sometimes you have to lower the water to raise the health. Folks loved that line. It stuck. By October, the board was stronger than ever. They held potlucks, volunteer cleanup days, even a kids' fish-free weekend. The atmosphere around Birchwater shifted. Instead of fear and fines, we had laughter and cooperation. And then, believe it or not, the County Historical Society got involved. After hearing about the bridge surviving both storms and lawsuits, they sent a rep to inspect. 2 weeks later, I got a letter in the mail. We are pleased to inform you that the Cole Footbridge has been recognized as a structure of historical significance to the Birchwater region. I sat down on the porch steps and just let it sink in. After months of fighting, lying, threatening, sabotaging my grandfather's bridge had not only survived, it was now officially honored. Karen, she was unraveling. Word spread that she'd burned through her savings on legal bills. Her glass-box mansion went up for sale. Rumor was she planned to move south. But before she left, she tried one last stunt. She showed up at a board meeting, uninvited, waving papers. "I'll sue every one of you individually," she snarled, "for defamation, for damages, for emotional distress. Carla, calm as a surgeon. He just leaned forward and said, "Go ahead. Karen, we'll be waiting with all the evidence you left behind." The room burst into applause. For the first time, Karen didn't have a comeback. She stormed out, heels clacking like a gavel that nobody cared about anymore. That night, I stood on the bridge, the moonlight turning the water silver. I thought about my grandfather, my father, Lila. I thought about all the neighbors who had finally stood up together. "Looks like you're safe now," I whispered, patting the rail. The boards creaked softly under my boots, as if to say, "Took you long enough." But deep down, I knew this wasn't just about the bridge anymore. It was about something bigger. About neighbors remembering they had a voice. About proving that bullies, no matter how loud, no matter how slick, don't get the last word when people stand together. And maybe, just maybe, it was about healing more than just a lake. By November, Birchwater felt like a different town. The leaves had dropped. The air smelled like wood smoke. And for the first time in years, folks were smiling when they waved instead of glancing over their shoulders. The board hosted a community chili cook-off, and I swear half the neighborhood turned up with crock-pots. Laughter bounced off the walls of the community center where, just months before, Karen had ruled like a queen on a throne. I stood there with a paper bowl in my hands, watching kids chase each other between tables, and thought, this is what it was always supposed to be like. But bullies don't disappear. They linger like a bad smell. Even though Karen's mansion had a for sale sign staked in the front yard, she still tried to stir trouble from the sidelines. Anonymous letters showed up in mailboxes claiming the new board was illegitimate. Someone posted flyers about illegal water manipulation tacked to trees at the trailhead. Most folks just rolled their eyes, but it was clear she hadn't let go. Deputy Alvarez kept the investigation into the dam tampering alive. "We're close," she told me over coffee at Murphy's General. "We've got surveillance footage tying one of the men directly back to Karen's contractor." "Think you'll charge her?" I asked. "Alvarez Siget. She's slippery. Might claim she didn't authorize it. But we'll get someone. And it'll trace back." That gave me some peace. But I still slept lighter than I used to. Every creak outside at night made me wonder if another stunt was brewing. Meanwhile, the bridge had taken on a life of its own. With the Historical Society's recognition, people actually came to see it. Families from the next county over stopped by. Kids running across the planks. Parents snapping photos. One Saturday, a young man in his 20s approached me shyly. "Sir, would you mind if I proposed to my girlfriend here? I heard this bridge has history." I swallowed the lump in my throat and smiled. "Son, that's exactly what it's for." A week later, I watched from a respectful distance as he dropped to one knee at the very same spot I had decades earlier. She said yes, of course. Cheers echoed across the lake. I swear the bridge itself seemed to hum. That moment reminded me why I'd fought so hard. It wasn't just wood and stone. It was a stage for love, for family, for continuity. No HOA fine could ever measure that. December brought snow, thick and silent. The lake froze in patches, glittering under the pale sun. For once, the season felt peaceful. Until Karen tried to file get this an environmental complaint with the state. accusing me of ecological vandalism. She claimed the lake lowering had killed fish populations and destroyed shoreline stability. Marcus, the biologist, practically laughed when he read her filing. She must have thought nobody keeps records. We've got hard data, before and after. If anything, the lake's healthier than it's been in years. He submitted the data, along with photos of spawning beds teeming with life. The state closed the case within a week. Another strikeout for Karen. Christmas that year felt sweeter. The board organized a holiday potluck at the community center. Miss June brought her famous pies. Walt grilled venison. Carla decorated the hall with strings of lights. Kids ran around in Santa hats. And in the corner, someone had hung up a photo of the bridge, framed with the words, "Our heritage, our home." I stared at it a long time. My chest swelled with something I hadn't felt in months. Pure, quiet gratitude. Walt clapped me on the back. "Looks like you won, Cole." I shook my head. "No, Walt, we won." Still, I knew Karen wasn't entirely gone. She hadn't sold her place yet. And word was she was dragging her feet out of spite. Every time I drove past that glass palace with its lights blazing empty inside, I felt the tension in my shoulders. Then, in January, came the twist. Deputy Alvarez called. "Cole, thought you'd want to hear this. We finally traced the payment for the dam sabotage. Guess whose account it came from?" I didn't need to guess. "Charges are being filed." Alvarez continued. "She won't walk away from this one." For the first time since this whole nightmare started, I felt like justice was finally catching up to her. That night, I stood on the bridge in the cold, breath clouding in the air. The boards creaked under the frost. I ran my hand over the rail and whispered, "We did it. Granddad, we kept it safe." But I also knew the story wasn't over, not until Karen was truly out of our lives, and Birchwater could breathe free for good. By February, the word spread fast. Karen had been officially charged for orchestrating the sabotage at the dam. Deputy Alvarez stopped by my place to deliver the news in person. She stood on my porch, snow crunching under her boots, and said simply, "We got her." It wasn't just a relief, it was vindication. For months, she'd called me paranoid, unstable, even dangerous. And now, the law was calling her what she really was: reckless, manipulative, and guilty. The county didn't throw her in prison. White-collar folks like her rarely see the inside of a cell, but she got slapped with fines bigger than any she'd ever dished out to neighbors. Worse for her, she lost credibility completely. By spring, her mansion had sold at a fraction of what she paid. When the moving trucks pulled out, nobody waved goodbye. The silence was its own verdict. Life at Birchwater blossomed again, without Karen's shadow looming. Neighbors found reasons to gather fish fries, bonfires, cleanup days. The new board set up a community fund to actually help residents, small grants for repairs, scholarships for kids, even a shared tool shed, so nobody had to buy everything twice. The bridge became more than just mine. Folks called it our bridge. Kids chalked drawings on the planks in summer. Couples strolled hand in hand at dusk. And every year, a new round of initials appeared carved carefully into the cedar rail. Instead of fines for aesthetic violations, the board put up a small plaque at the entrance. Cole Footbridge, established 1947, a symbol of resilience, memory, and run steadily at its line game and community. I won't lie, when I first saw that plaque, I had to blink hard. One afternoon in May, Marcus brought a group of college students to study the lake. They stood on the bridge, jotting notes about ecology and restoration. And one young woman asked me, "Mr. Cole, why'd you fight so hard for this?" I thought for a moment, then said, "Because some things aren't just wood and stone. They're stories. And if you let someone bulldoze your story for the sake of aesthetics, you don't just lose a bridge, you lose who you are." She nodded, scribbled it down, and I realized maybe that lesson mattered as much as the data. By summer, Birchwater had a new tradition, Heritage Day. Folks gathered at the bridge with picnic baskets, shared food, told stories about the lake. Kids reenacted the tale of the evil HOA queen in makeshift costumes, much to everyone's amusement. Even the newcomers who'd once backed Karen laughed along, relieved to be free of her rule. Walt leaned on the rail beside me, chewing sunflower seeds. "Funny, ain't it? She tried to erase this bridge, and now it's the centerpiece of the whole dang community. Guess that's what happens when you stand up instead of bowing down," I said. But here's the truth. It wasn't just about winning against Karen. It was about what we all learned along the way. We learned that rules are only as strong as the people who enforce them, and people can be wrong. We learned that neighbors, when they stop whispering and start standing together, are stronger than any HOA bylaw. And we learned that history matters not because it's old, but because it carries the weight of everyone who came before us. Now, every morning, I still walk that bridge with a mug of coffee. Sometimes kids are already fishing at the end. Sometimes couples are taking photos. Sometimes it's just me and the quiet. The cedar under my boots creaks the same way it did when I was a boy. And the lake ripples like it's breathing easy again. I pause at the center, where my grandfather once stood, where my father once proposed, where I asked Lila for forever. I rest my hand on the rail, carved full of initials from generations, and I whisper, "We kept it safe." And I think about all of you out there, dealing with HOAs that act like tyrants. Maybe they've fined you for a flag. Maybe they've threatened your garden. Maybe they've told you that you can't park your own truck in your own driveway. So I'll ask you this. What would you do if your HOA came after your memories, your history, your family's story? Would you tear it down? Or would you stand, stubborn and steady, until the truth finally wins? Drop a comment. Tell me your story. 'Cause if there's one thing I know after all this, it's that when we share, we fight back together. And no HOA bully in the world can outlast that.